François Legault will be Quebec's next premier after the right-wing Populist Party won a decisive majority government in Monday's election. Quebec's two traditional governing parties of the past 50 years, the Liberals and Parti Québécois, each suffered historic losses. The Liberals lost more than half their seats, dropping from 68 to 32. The PQ lost its official party status, winning only 9 seats, down from 28. PQ leader Jean-François Lisée announced his resignation immediately, after losing his own seat, while Liberal leader and outgoing Premier Philippe Couillard said he would reflect on his own future. In order to avoid any instability that may result from this, my reflection will be short, Mr. Couillard said in his concession speech Monday night. The far-left Quebec Solidaire Party won 10 seats, up from only 3, squeaking ahead of the PQ as the main separatist party in the National Assembly. Today our movement is bigger, stronger, party co-spokesperson Manon Massé said Monday. Mr. Legault inherits a relatively stable provincial economy, which could face rocky days ahead from the Canada-US-Mexico trade deal that would open part of Canada's protected dairy market. Here's a closer look at the economic challenges the CAQ will face in government. CAQ triumphant. This is only the third election for the coalition Avenir Quebec, a populist coalition of federalist and former separatists that François Legault, a former Parti Québécois cabinet minister, co-founded in 2011. But this was also Quebec's first election in 4 decades in which sovereignty wasn't a campaign issue, which freed up traditional voting blocs, federalist and separatist alike, to change their allegiances. Mr. Legault profited from that upheaval more than anyone else. His party won traditional Liberal seats in the eastern townships, it.y and Montreal region, as well as PQ bastions like Lac-Saint-Jean. A jubilant Mr. Legault reached out to both sides of his new voter base on Monday night. Today many Quebecers have demonstrated that it's possible to make adversaries from yesterday work together for tomorrow, he said in his acceptance speech. Liberals routed. The Liberals have governed Quebec for the past 15 years, aside from an 18-month interlude of PQ rule in 2013-14. But on Monday night, leader Philippe Couillard led the party to one of its worst defeats. It got less than 25% of the popular vote, down from 41.5% in the last election, as voters in majority francophone ridings turned mostly to the CAQ. In his concession speech, Mr. Couillard congratulated Mr. Legault and took responsibility for the Liberals' losses, saying he would undertake a reflection on my personal future as leader of the party. In politics, you have to learn how to taste the joy of victory and accept defeat because they are the two sides of democracy. I am not bitter and I ask you not to be. I am proud and you should be also. Separatists realigned. The PQ, a dominating force in Quebec politics for more than 50 years, got reduced to 4th place status in one of its worst elections ever. It won only 17% of the popular vote and only 9 seats, short of the 20% and 12 seats it needed to maintain official party status. Leader Jean-François Lisée lost his Montreal seat of Rosemont and announced his resignation, taking a large part of the responsibility for the disappointing result. The PQ had been outflanked on the left by the Quebec Solidaire Party, which Mr. Lisée had accused of being a stealth Marxist front. QS grew from 3 seats to 10, and made inroads beyond its usual base of support in Montreal. Quebec Solidaire is not just the party of the Plateau Montana Royal, the party's co-spokesperson, Manon Massé, said Monday night, referring to the hip Montreal neighborhood scene as the party's traditional turf. Quebec Solidaire is the party of people who want change for real. Turnout in decline for all the rhetoric of change and political alliances breaking down. Not as many Quebecers voted this time around as in previous years. As of Tuesday morning, the estimated turnout was just over 66%, the second lowest in 45 years. The next lowest, from 2008, was a snap election held only a year after the previous one that brought the Liberals Jean Charest from minority to majority government. No, he's the premier designate. He officially becomes the premier when he and his cabinet are sworn in by Quebec's Lieutenant Governor, Jean-Michel Doyon. Please gently correct anyone who calls Mr. Legault premier-elect. There is no such thing in Canada's parliamentary system, in which premiers are the leaders of parties or coalitions who have the most seats in their legislatures. No one is directly elected to the office of premier. Immigration was one of the fault lines of this election. The Liberals plan to raise the immigration quota from 50,000 per year to 60,000, while the CAQ vowed to cut it to 40,000 and subject immigrants to a Quebec values and French language test, potentially expelling those who failed it. Toward the campaign's end, even Mr. Legault was unclear about how the policy would work. He failed to answer several key questions about immigration in the province, and at the final debate, he softened his tone somewhat and admitted it happens. I make mistakes when I answer certain questions on immigration. I listen, and I correct my mistakes. Clarifying Quebec's future policy on immigration, and convincing Quebecers to support it, will be a major challenge for the CAQ government. Immigration to Quebec has grown over recent years, as indicated in the charts below, but the province has had trouble retaining immigrants in the face of competition from Ontario and Western Canada. That's exacerbated labor shortages in the province that municipalities had hoped to fill with immigrant workers. Economy Mr. Legault, a former airline executive, ran on promises of low taxes and business-friendly policies. But investors will still have to be convinced that an untested party, only 7 years old, will deliver on those pledges once in government. Mr. Legault has one big advantage, a lower debt and balanced budgets inherited from his Liberal predecessor, who instituted unpopular cuts to health care and social services to make that happen. The new government will take the reins of the province in a very enviable situation, Sébastien Lavoie, chief economist for Laurentian Bank in Montreal, told the Globe and Mail. Back in 2014, credit agencies were putting pressure on the province, and economic growth was sluggish. Now, it's as good as it gets in terms of economic momentum. The house is in order. Trade. Just as Quebec's party leaders were wrapping up their last campaign day, Canadian and U.S. negotiators in Washington concluded a historic trade deal that will have big implications for Quebecers. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, successor to the North American Free Trade Agreement, would open up a percentage of Canada's protected dairy market to U.S. producers. Farmers in Quebec, the largest dairy-producing province, stands to lose a lot from increased competition and the end of policies that allowed them to sell surplus skim milk easily. All of Quebec's party leaders opposed any softening of supply management, but it is now Mr. Legault who has to deal with the impact. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, Alberta Premier Rachel Notley, with reports from Les Perros, Ingrid Peretz, Réal Seguin, and the Canadian press,